Mijente, and at-large City Councilor Michelle Wu. And to the candidates, thank you all again for being here this evening. We're turning it over now to Melissa for our first lightning round. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Soraya. Our first section is on education. We will have 3 lightning round questions. The first 2 questions will give candidates an opportunity to share knowledge of the key city facts, and the final one will be a yes or no question. Candidates should be ready to write an answer on a blank piece of paper and hold it up to the screen. We will ask everyone to look up and say and share. Finally, we'll have 2 deep dive questions and 2 questions specific to individual candidates. Each candidate has 1 minute to respond to questions. Let's dive in. Question number 1. How many students are in Boston public schools? Write the answers, and when I see everyone looking up, great. You guys can hold up your answers. We have 53, 54. Okay, we are in the 50s. Great. So the actual answer is 52,000. Next question. What is the current BPS budget? Again, what is the current BPS budget? Please write down your answer and look up when you are ready. Okay, you can hold up your answers. We have 1.4 billion for John Santiago, 1.3 billion for Michelle Wu, 1.3 billion for Anissa George, 1.2 billion for Andrea Campbell, 1.3 billion for John Barrows, and 1 billion plus for Major Kinjani, and the answer is 1.3 billion. All right, next question, question number 3. Do you support a change in BPS governance to allow Boston voters the right to have a majority or fully elected school committee? If you support hybrid, will your approach to hybrid be majority elected? This is a hold up a green paper for yes and a red paper for no. Okay, so it looks like Michelle Wu and John Santiago are saying yes, leaving Kinjani, Anissa George, Andrea Campbell, and George Barrows with no. Great, I'm now gonna turn it over to Soraya.
Excellent. So our first deep dive question on education. What is your proposed approach to the exam school entrance process? Please be specific. Do you support keeping an entrance exam? If you support keeping a test, what steps would you take to make sure access to these schools is equitable? Candidates, you'll each have 60 seconds to respond. And Councilor Michelle Wu, you are first.
Thank you so much. And thank you for a functional timer. Wonderful. I'm really grateful to be here with everyone. This is an issue that is deeply personal as I've lived it as a legal guardian for my younger sister while my mom was living with mental health challenges. So I know what's at stake and that the underlying challenge is every single one of our high school seats needs to be excellent. So it's not a high stakes situation. I support keeping permanent changes so that there is equity and extra criteria for our exam schools that account for resources. So I support having an exam and grade combination that is not the ISEE, something that is aligned with the BPS curriculum like the MCAS, as well as a more specific, maybe census tract level accounting for resource levels across the city, or something like seats for individual feeder schools within Boston Public Schools so that we can ensure we have diversity and representation across the board in BPS.
Thank you. Representative Santiago, you have 60 seconds.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. I mean, there's no one on here that wants greater diversity at the exam schools, and I do. As a Latino person, education was my lifeline. I know the talent in our communities of color, There is no lack of intelligence, capability, desire. The problem is that it's not just an achievement gap that we're seeing, it's a lack of opportunity. And right now, BPS, there's a complete lack of accountability and transparency. And that's why I'm the only candidate that supports a fully elected school committee. So when it comes to temporary exam school admission process with zip codes, I think it's well attended, but I think it falls short from what we need right now. As mayor, look, I want to make our exam schools deserves. I think we should be making sure that the exam entrance exam is reflective of the BPS curriculum. I support fully integrating the MAPS exam. I want to make the admissions process much more robust and comprehensive. Listen, grades or exam are important, but I think there are other ways to determine resiliency, other ways to determine character and determination. I think this is an important critical piece of making students the best people that they can be. I also want to support making sure that they have access to tutoring, and I will guarantee that as the mayor of Boston.
Thank you. Mayor Janey, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of the organizers for this forum. I have long been an advocate of our schools, of our school children, and have certainly worked on the issue of exam school admissions and how we make sure that they are more diverse. It is a false choice to assume that they have to either be rigorous or diverse. We can have both. And we can do that through an exam. We can do that through a process that considers grades, as well as one that looks at census tracts. That is the work that is currently underway by the work group that has been working now for months to ensure that there is in fact equity, that there is in fact diversity, that there's more opportunity for Boston kids, and that we still maintain the rigor. These schools are wonderful schools, and the truth is we have to make sure that all of our schools have that same kind of opportunity. It cannot be limited to just 3 schools in our system.
And did I hear a yes? We want to keep exams?
There's an exam, there's grades, and there's also looking at other factors that would get at diversity like census tracts.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Asabi George, you have 60 seconds.
First, if we put all of this time and effort into fixing all of our schools over literally just 3 of them, our school system would be in a much better place. We're constantly talking about fixing 3 when we clearly need to invest and improve high quality education for all of our students in all of our schools. I support the exam, and the MAPS testing program was a shift we made so that the test better aligned with the Boston Public Schools curriculum. Taking away the exam schools does not fix the disparities in the Boston Public Schools. It only delays getting to the real problems and distracts from the larger conversation around equity and access and high quality education in all of our schools. We have let down already our Black and Brown students way before they've even talked or thought about taking an exam. We need to set our students up for success in early grades, and we need to implement a early literacy program starting in pre-K.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to all the organizers for creating this space, and thank you to everyone for joining tonight out of your busy schedules. This is indeed personal to me. I went to 5 excellent Boston public schools, including Boston Latin School, and was blessed to go off to Princeton University and then UCLA for law school. And I often say, but for the grace of God and the education I got in BPS, I would not have been successful. And my twin brother, on the other hand, cycled in and out of the criminal justice system, passing away while in that system. And he went to very different schools. And this system very much failed him. I am in favor of keeping the test. I supported the 1-year changes, but in keeping the test, I am open to exploring not only census tracts. We had a discussion with the task force members yesterday, also looking at the possibility of looking at socioeconomic status. We can't do quotas like we did in the past when I was at Latin school, but what does it mean to take in consideration socioeconomic status, other factors to create greater diversity and equity in that system? But we need to take the show on the road.
Thank you. Mr. Barros, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you, Soraya, and I want to thank all of the sponsors for tonight's forum, for the work that you do for our city and the conversation tonight. And thank you to all of those who tuned in. Education is critical. It's why my parents came to this country, is to try to give us a better opportunity. And my brother was able to go to Boston Latin because of the quota system. My wife was able to graduate from Boston Latin because of the quota system. But as soon as the court struck that down, we saw what happened with diversity. We have to address diversity in terms of our exam schools. I do support some kind of assessment, but it can't be 50% of the reason why a student is selected to the exam schools. We have to include not only just grades, but class ranking. We've got to include teacher recommendation. And then we've got to have a test that's aligned with BPS curriculum so that our students have a fair chance of making it and properly prep them so that they can have an opportunity to get in. And if it doesn't get us the diversity we need, we've got to address it.
Thank you. On to our second detailed question in this section. It involves a little bit of background. Providing free pre-K education was a top priority for former Mayor Marty Walsh, but he was only able to achieve funding for about half of the 6,400 slots estimated to be necessary to educate 4-year-olds. We want to know about your plan for making universal pre-K a reality in Boston. Would you aim to expand seats beyond 4-year-olds? How would you raise revenue for sustained funding for this priority? And what would you do differently from Walsh, who sought state funding to guarantee success? Representative Santiago, you'll go first. You have 60 seconds.
Great. Thank you, Soraya. Look, early education is the basis here, right? It lays the foundation for future learning and lifelong success, particularly high quality one. And I'm proud that as a state representative, I have recently co-signed and co-sponsored a piece of legislation that will create public universal early education across the Commonwealth. And just recently, over the COVID-19 pandemic, I voted to increase funding significantly by $20 million to early education programs. So when it comes to the mayor of Boston, I absolutely want us to get us to universal pre-K. I know the challenges are with respect to funding. I'm proud that just 2 weeks ago, I supported a fair share amendment. It's going to be able to bring up to $2 billion worth of education funding to the state of Massachusetts. We need to increase progressive revenue across the city, across the state. I'm looking forward to using that revenue to really invest in early education programs because it's so important. It really puts us on a pathway to getting students the education that they deserve. So a couple of things I want to do in City Hall as well. I want to put an early childhood development City Hall office, and I want to make sure that we have a strong vocal leader there, and I'll be that mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Janey, you'll go next. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. So I am a big supporter of universal pre-K. Coming out of Parents United for Childcare as a community organizer, I know how important it is, not just for families who are seeking to work, but to make sure that our kids get a good and early start in terms of their education. And it is critical in terms of closing the opportunity and achievement gap. We can have a strategy that also engages our early education workers, many of whom are women, many of whom are women of color specifically. In terms of the funding, certainly I would love for the state to do more in terms of funding. That has not always been the case. We know it has been drying up more and more and more. And so that I would seek funding through other creative sources that create a revenue stream that is ongoing, whether that be through different transfer taxes, things of that sort, or asking our business community to do more in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sabi George, you'll go next. You have 60 seconds.
We know that Boston is the leader in providing educational opportunities across all ages. But one place where we have continued to fall short is making sure that our youngest learners, our youngest residents have access to high quality childcare and early education. We need to make sure that we are tapping into public dollars to invest in a very important part of the continuum of education. We need to have universal childcare and early ed starting at birth where appropriate. And we need to leverage our partnerships with the state and with our community, as well as with private early educators and childcare providers to make sure that we do that using both city dollars, state dollars, federal block grants, as well as social impact bonds to make sure that it happens, and work with private providers and development funds to make it happen. It's so critically important when we think about the success we hope for our kids in later years. Early ed and childcare is a critical component of that.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell, you'll go next.
This is an issue that is near and dear, and I have been saying for a little while now, one of the reasons I jumped into the mayor's race in September, because I put out a report, now it's 3 years old, after engaging a whole host of stakeholders who have been working on these issues for a really long time. And the number one issue everyone agreed on is that we needed universal pre-K and childcare in the city of Boston, and that we could do it. First, we needed to define it from birth to 5 years old. And we needed to organize, creating a coalition. We often tend to work in silos. And so the resources are there, whether at the state government, these new federal dollars that are coming in. In the midst of COVID, employers and private sector are absolutely standing up and stepping up to be able to resource these efforts because they see how important it is to the economy. And so if anything, it's organizing all stakeholders and pushing for this to happen. I called my report Action for Boston Children because of the inaction on this very issue and also limiting how it was defined. And so I will continue to push for this. It's a priority for me now. It will continue to be a priority going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Barros. You'll be next. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you very much. You know, for a very long time, I've been pushing for a seamless birth to career educational pathway that supports young people through every stage of development and prioritizes knowledge and skills that people need to thrive in school, career, and in life. In fact, we know that early education is the only thing that has had consistent impact when we're trying to close the racial achievement gap. This is going to be a priority for me regardless. Now, the way that we fund it, right now, we've got 15 million going to our 4-year-old seats. We need to take that to 75 million to be able to do 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. I would do that in a combination of federal grants that are coming into the city and general funds. We can do it now. And as mayor, I would do it in my first 100 days.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. I've been to just about every political meeting across the city with a baby on my hip, often another one holding onto my leg. Both my kids were born after I joined the council. And so I know well the impossible juggle that we put working parents through. And I also know how much we are putting a burden on the workers who are taking care of our most precious cargo, our childcare workforce, majority women, vast majority women of color. It is shameful how little our providers are being paid. And so at the city level, this is a moment for leadership to connect historic momentum, right? Our federal delegation pushing for a $700 billion childcare package, state legislation groundbreaking that would cap costs per household at 7% of your income. But at the city level, what we need to do is build that ecosystem, bring family providers into the conversation, as well as ensure there's geographic equity. We've been losing seats across our city, especially in communities of color, especially where young kids live. And so our job is to be that conduit to really deliver equity through the resources coming down in this moment.
Thank you. Our first candidate-specific question of the evening goes to Councilor Andrea Campbell. You stated in the Progressive Mass questionnaire that you are not opposed to the expansion of charter schools in Boston, while acknowledging that it is decided at the state level. The Boston Globe reported that you are supported by a PAC that has raised over $700,000, including hundreds of thousands in donations from individuals who are national charter school advocates. What assurances will you give to voters that you won't take action to change the status quo as it relates to charter school expansion? If you have no assurances, please tell us why.
Thank you for the question. There's actually been quite a bit of misinformation out there about my position on charter schools, on public education. First, I have to say an IE is not coordinated by me or anything related to my campaign. It is separate and apart. We have no dealings with this IE whatsoever. I know there are others who have similar IEs, but again, no connection to this campaign. But for me, it has always been about making sure that Boston Public Schools is the best system. I'm a mother of 2 boys. I live in Mattapan. My boys have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school compared to other neighborhoods where it's 80%. Everything I have done since becoming a counselor has been to improve the Boston public schools. Hence why I put out a report 3 years ago, pushing for greater equity in the system. But I also live in reality that there are many communities, including in the current district I represent, that don't have access to a high quality school. So I don't judge that choice, but what I do is make sure that Boston Public Schools is the best. So our families don't feel compelled to choose another system, especially our low income families.
And I just want to give you a brief moment. Is there anything that you want to say to voters about changing the status quo of charter schools in Boston?
There will be no change of status quo of charter schools under my leadership. My entire focus will be on Boston Public Schools so that our families don't have to choose other systems to get their education. That's critically important to me. And I'll just add, I have two boys. I have an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old, soon to be 4-year-old. Alexander, when he was 3, did not get into a pre-K seat. I cried. It was emotional. But he did finally get into a school, and I felt like I hit the lottery. This system fails everyone when we say that you have to hit the lottery in order to get a good BPS education. We can change that in the city of Boston because we have everything it would take to ensure all of our children.
Counselor, we are running short on time.
Thank you for the additional opportunity.
Our second candidate-specific question of the evening goes to Representative Santiago. Earlier this month, you became the only candidate supporting a fully elected school committee. But based on your answer in the Progressive Mass questionnaire, this is a departure from your previous support for a hybrid committee. Please tell us why your position has changed.
Well, thank you, Soraya, for the question, and thank you for those who've been tracking the campaign for the last couple of months. You're absolutely right. It is a change. We've evolved, right? When I fill out the questionnaire, I was in favor of a hybrid model. But over the course of the past couple of weeks, it's been very clear and evident to parents, students, to people all across this city that we're not getting the work done, right? That the people deserve greater accountability and accessibility to their elected leaders. And therefore, we've pushed forward with this elected school committee model that I feel that is going to provide the accountability that we deserve in the city of Boston. And so my first 100 days in office, we will immediately create a commission to get us to that, to return us to a fully elected school committee. And I want to make sure that process is very much community driven, it is transparent, and it's a commission that will ultimately bring forth a committee that reflects the diversity of the students and the needs of our families.
Thank you so much. That concludes our education section. We'll go back to Melissa for our housing lightning round.
Thank you, Soraya. Okay, our next question is, our first lightning round question is, how many people are homeless in Boston based on the 2021 homeless census? And so when you are ready, just write down the answer and look up. Okay, please share your answer. Okay, so we have from Ivy George, 1,900, John Barrows, 1,500. It's undercounted by Mayor Kim Janey. John Santiago says, I'm sorry, can you hold that up higher? Is that 1,300? Yep, 1,300. Michelle Wu, 10,000. And the actual answer
my answer was 19,900 plus 10,000.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, thank you. The actual answer is 4,600.
I am going to disagree with that because we have 5,000 students in the Boston Public Schools.
We acknowledge, of course, that the census is just a one-night count in Boston. Perhaps that is something to rectify if one of you becomes mayor. The second lightning round question, Melissa.
Thank you, Soraya. Area median income, or AMI, is a measure used to categorize housing affordability, with truly affordable rents being defined by the Coalition for Truly Affordable Boston as affordable on average of 40% AMI. The question is, what is 100% AMI for a household of 4? Okay, and when everyone is done with their answer, please look up and share. So from John Barrows, we have 113,000. From Anissa Sabi George, 70,000. Andrea Campbell, 50,000. Did I say that? How much was it? 80? 80,000. From John Santiago, we have, 100,000. From Michelle Wu, we have 110,000. From Mayor Kim Janey, we have 90,000. The answer is 120,800. And for a quick reference, the median income for African American and Black households is approximately 45,000. The median income of Hispanic or Latino household is about $38,000. Okay. Question number 3. When the CDC eviction moratorium is lifted at the end of the month, would you support a city level moratorium for 1 year? Please hold up a red or green paper. Okay, Andrea Campbell says yes. Anissa Sabi George says no. John Barrow says yes. John Santiago says no. Mayor Kim Janey says yes. And Michelle Wu also says yes. So thank you. And I'm turning it over again to Soraya.
Thanks, Melissa. Our first deep dive question in the housing section also involves some context. Former Mayor Walsh's housing plan called for the creation of 69,000 new units of housing at varied income levels, including 16,000 new units of income restricted units by 2030. Between January 2011 and March 2021, there were about 36,000 units that were built or permitted. Tell us about your vision for adding new housing units in Boston. Please specify the number of units you would seek to build, how much of those units would be at incomes for 50% AMI, and any updates you'd like to pursue to the Inclusionary Development Policy, or IDP, which helps create income restricted units. Mayor Janey, you'll go first in this section. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. Housing is such an important topic. We know we were in crisis long before the pandemic, and it's something that I experienced in terms of housing insecurity. We have to do much more to ensure that people in our city can afford to live in our city. That means a range of things, requiring from developers more opportunity for homeownership. More mixed income development, making sure that we are looking at IDP. I'm working right now with Chief Sheila Dillon on IDP changes that would help ensure that there is more affordability here in Boston. Beyond that, we have to also make sure that we're doing much more to help people climb out of poverty, that we are helping around economic opportunities, ensuring that this recovery is equitable so that folks are not forced to live in affordable housing that requires them to stay in poverty. We have to make sure that there are pathways out of poverty and not just continue to build, though we need to build because we have a housing crisis.
And do you care to share what percentage of IDP you'd like to see?
Well, I think we are looking at where we can go.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We are looking at where we can go with that, but in addition to percentage changes, we're looking at the units and where we would trigger that affordability, lowering that from the current 10 to something else within the city. So it's twofold on that front.
Excellent. Thank you. Councilor Sabi George, you'll go next. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you very much for the question. And we know, all of us know how important housing is because of the rising cost of living here in the city of Boston. Housing has become too expensive for our families, for individuals, and we see the burden it has placed on too many in the rise in chronic homelessness across the city of Boston. When we think about inclusionary zoning, we need to be working towards increasing that to 20%. And at the same time, working to drive down the AMI that we are using for those affordable units. We have to leverage the city's resources and assets to create housing that is truly affordable and maximize and use the existing Boston Housing Authority land and facilities and assets to create more low-income housing. We also need to work to reduce the wait list when it comes to the Boston Housing Authority. 48,000 families and individuals on that wait list, and we're only housing about 800 a year. We need to make sure and work to reinvigorate the Housing Innovation Lab, to bring innovation to this field, to work very intently and urgently to create more housing and more affordable housing across our city.
Thank you so much. Andrea Campbell, you'll go next.
Thank you for this question. Before I sort of commit to a number of units, this is where I think we actually need to do a little bit more planning, and not just for planning's sake. The 2030 plan was a great start. But if you look at various neighborhoods, we don't actually have a deep sense of not only how much housing may be needed in that particular neighborhood, like Mattapan, for example, but what type of housing? Is it more public housing? Is it more homeownership opportunities? What is the median income and the affordable price point for that particular neighborhood? I think once we do a deep dive there, then we absolutely should be immediately building in response to that neighborhood plan that is community driven and community created. And then for me, IDP, yes, I've come out with a robust housing policy that is very specific as to what I would do. Number one is absolutely increasing IDP to 20%, greater investment in community land trust. I would also establish a work development housing voucher program for this AMI, and also do more to invest in public housing and people moving out of public housing into home ownership opportunities.
Great, thank you. I've been warned we're going to start using the mute button, so be aware, candidates. Mr. Barrows, you'll go next. You have 60 seconds.
Thanks for starting with me, Soraya. I love you too. But it's a really important question. Boston is too expensive for too many of our families. I've dedicated most of my professional life to build permanently affordable housing to both protect our families and also protect our communities. As mayor, I'd make sure that we invest in the land trust model, invest in community ownership, invest in community leadership in how we help build out our neighborhoods. It's really important. It's proud to be part of the Walsh administration where we created hundreds of new affordable housing. I want to say I would be committed to move forward and hit the 69,000 units of housing and then figure out where we go and how we continue to build forward. Recently, we increased linkage fees on commercial buildings so that we can have more funding for workforce development. And I would look to increase IDP to bring it to somewhere near 20% because we do need more resources for affordable housing.
Did you tell me an IDP number?
Yeah, I'd bring it close to 20%.
Excellent. Councillor Wu, you'll go next.
Thank you. This is the issue that I hear most often across the city, knocking on doors, at events. We know that more than half of all the renters living in Boston are rent burdened, paying more than they should as a proportion of their income to housing just to survive. And we know that families are getting pushed out of our city. So this is urgent, and we need to do two things. One is to ensure that we are growing the supply of affordable housing, especially affordable housing for families and extremely low income housing at that 50% and lower AMI, using city resources, using city buildings and integrating affordable housing, directly constructing affordable housing, supporting community land trusts. There's a lot that we can do. We also need stabilization of our tenants and renters right now. We need to ensure that as we're growing supply, we're not pushing out all of our families in the meantime. I support having the tools of rent stabilization, rent control in Boston. And I know I'm going to get asked about IDP. I support getting to 20% and then evaluating when we can go up from there.
Excellent. Thank you. Representative Santiago, you'll go next.
Great. Thank you, Soraya. Listen, affordable housing is a right that every Bostonian should have. And COVID-19 has shown us the importance of housing. Housing justice equals health justice, and so I'm very proud of my record on Beacon Hill. We helped to pass one of the most progressive eviction moratoriums in the country. We passed housing choice bill that would increase supply across the Commonwealth. And as a representative, I was tasked to lead the coalition to go talk to the Speaker of the House to get that linkage home rule done. So as mayor, I want to do a couple of things. I want to be innovative how we think about affordable housing opportunities in this city. And in consultation with the advocates, I want to listen to them and put their ideas on the table. With respect to MAHA, they're telling me they want 25% of new development to be home ownership opportunities for families making less than $100,000. That is my goal. We're going to fully fund One Plus Boston. We're going to fund the STASH program, and we're going to use the City of Boston's AAA bond rating to do just that. We have a AAA bond rating that can be used to issue hundreds of millions of dollars in bonding to build the type of housing that we want. Obviously, investing in community land trusts and CDCs is something I'm committed to as well.
And did you give a number for IDP?
Yes, happy to increase IDP. It's a rate, I think it's to be determined. I want to start off by eliminating the parking exemption that we have, but definitely want to increase it.
Great, thank you. Our next candidate-specific question goes to Mayor Janey. In the last forum with right to the city vote, you were the only candidate who indicated support for the Coalition for Truly Affordable Boston's demand of boosting the IDP requirement to 33% of developers' units and lower AMIs. You just mentioned that you were working with the housing chief. Can you tell us more about your plans to make this goal a reality?
Well, I think immediately we can do more in terms of the number of units. In terms of the percentage, I think we need to understand more what the data will say around change behavior due to the pandemic and what this means in terms of our economy overall for jobs. It is a goal that I want to get to, but I think we need to involve more people, engage more of the stakeholders, and not just real estate developers, but obviously the housing rights community. That is why in my mayoral transition, I made sure to make sure that all voices were at the table. In fact, I had housing rights activists co-chair, as well as a real estate developer who had done good development in our city. And so on the percentage, I want us to get there, but we do need to do some more planning and thinking about how we would move up over time toward that number.
Great, thank you. The next candidate-specific question goes to Michelle Wu. You were the only candidate supporting state legislation to enable rent control, but this is a departure from the position you took in 2019 at the JP Progressives at-large candidates forum. You were not fully supporting rent control then. Tell us what's changed.
I remember that forum very well. Ms. Tanisha Sullivan didn't like it when I tried to do a double card at the same time. And I was trying to explain the nuance of, at that point, I think I was overthinking the difference between what some people mean by rent control versus rent stabilization. The bottom line is that this is beyond urgent. We are in a displacement crisis in Boston, and I stand in deep gratitude to the organizers who have been fighting for generations, for decades, and who I have learned so much from. Right? I come from studying economics in school, and there's lots of research about how rent control isn't the solution to creating more affordable housing. But what it does is it provides an immediate release valve in a moment of great crisis for us to get the rest of our tools in order. And so, yes, I look to organize alongside other municipalities in our area to put together a home rule petition that we could go to the State House with to ensure that we have a regional solution that crosses our municipal borders as well about rent stabilization, rent control.
Great, thank you. And now back to all of the candidates. Given that Councillor Wu is the only one who has expressed support for rent control, please tell us what you mean to pursue as a way for preventing displacement. What specific steps would you take in your first year of office? Councillor Asabi-George, you'll go first.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the real attention to the work we need to do as a city to prevent displacement, to prevent eviction, and to support families and create greater stability in their housing, and the work that we know that extends to in creating greater stability for children and for communities in areas where we create our opportunities around housing stability. As a city councilor, I've been committed to the work to end homelessness in our city, especially as it relates to our families and certainly to individuals who find themselves also dealing with substance use disorder and mental health illness and challenges and difficulties. We need to continue to fund and support and build our Office of Housing Stability and make sure that they have the tools and the resources they need to continue to support our families, our city's residents when housing becomes unstable. We also need to support programs like MAHA and first-time home buyer opportunities. Ownership is key to stability.
Great, thank you. Councillor Campbell, you'll go next. Some specific steps you take your first year in office to help prevent displacement.
Thank you. I would invite everyone on this Zoom to look at my housing plan because 60 seconds won't cut it. And I promise it's not very long and it's very specific. What's really important to me is that we do not promise things to constituents we know we cannot deliver on. And so I do think there are a whole host of toolkits in our toolbox to be able to use to ensure that folks are not displaced. I absolutely, of course, support in the immediate an eviction moratorium and making sure that the rent relief fund continues to be funded. In addition to that, I think we need to be building more housing that meets the needs of families, more homeownership opportunities at AMIs and affordable pricing points. We can do that. We have the power in the city of Boston to do that with greater intentionality. I support greater investments in community land trust. I started the vacant lot initiative in the city of Boston. We're activating hundreds of lots, some of it for housing purposes. There are a lot of other creative programs out there. I brought a program into the Boston Housing Authority that is moving people out of poverty into homeownership opportunities. There are a whole host of other programs out there that can do that.
First victim.
Thank you.
Mr. Barros, you're next. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you very much. Affordable housing is critical, and what we need to do is make sure that we do affordable housing that's protected. I think the first thing that I would do in the first 100 days is make sure that we are not trying to chase and preserve affordable rental housing like we're doing at the Forbes house in JP. We need to make sure that our affordable housing rental units are sitting either on land trust land or city-owned land, and so that whenever we come back to refinance, that it stays affordable. We keep chasing preservation, and we should no longer do that in Boston. Secondly, I will in fact create a fund immediately for acquisition, and then another fund for capacity building for land trust, so that neighborhoods can have more of a stake in what's happening in their neighborhood and protect it. And then we'll create a neighborhood investment fund, so that not only are we creating ways to protect it, but that neighbors are investing in the growth in their neighborhood and have ownership.
Great, thank you. Councillor Wu, you'll go next.
I'll just add, look, to say that we can't talk about something because it will be impossible to get it done or to deliver it goes against every fiber of Boston's DNA as a city. We are the city whose innovative, ambitious leadership that invests in our common shared future defines the progress of history all across the country. And in this moment, it's on our shoulders to recognize that what we've been doing hasn't worked. A development system that relies on a case-by-case approvals with a development agency, the BPDA, that is based on a 1960s era urban renewal displacement philosophy, a commitment to just throwing housing units, goal numbers out there without planning, without identifying that the luxury housing that's being built isn't freeing up housing in other parts of our income spectrum. We need to recognize and listen to those who are most impacted, our activists and organizers. This is an urgent issue, and I'm proud to be taking the lead on this.
Representative Santiago, you'll go next.
Right. I absolutely support ways to increase affordable housing options in Boston, and I'm 100% certain and agreeable with certain policies that help stabilize rents and open pathways to ownership. I mean, that's what I'm really interested in. To that end, as I said earlier, I've co-sponsored and advocated for the most progressive moratorium eviction in this country. Another thing that we did in the State House this past year during the pandemic is we had a record of $153 million in rental vouchers. And so as mayor, I want to build on some of those state programs and bring them to the municipal level, really to increase the number of rental vouchers and make sure that families can stay in their place, because we know how endangering anti-displacement can be for families. We did it during the pandemic, and we continue it as we hopefully get out of this pandemic in the coming months and year. I want to give renters every opportunity to buy their first house. You know, we have a system here that is more dedicated to renters than to homeowners. We need to recalibrate that, and I want to leverage the city's AAA bond rating to do just that, to build the types of housing where we can invest in homeownership opportunities for some of our lowest income individuals.
Thank you. Mayor Janey, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. And just want to thank Rep. Santiago for pointing out the need for more renters to be able to buy. What I just did last week as mayor right now was increase and expand opportunity for first-time home buyers to make their first purchase of a home, to live out the American dream by taking the down payment assistance from $10,000 to up to $40,000. That's what I've already done as mayor. Also in my very first week, understanding that we are in a crisis and that COVID made it worse, invested $50 million in rental relief. Already have done that as mayor. In addition, we definitely need to do more in terms of planning. We need to make sure that we have affordable options all across our city. Right now, there is a lot of concentration in deed-restricted housing in certain neighborhoods, creating a concentration of poverty. We need to make sure that there are economic opportunities to help people get out of poverty. We need mixed income development, and we need supportive housing, and we need to support programs like MAHA. My time.
Good job. We'll go over to Ed now for the lightning round in our public safety section.
And yeah, as Soraya said, this is police and public safety. And we're going to start with 2 factual questions, and then the third one will be a yes/no question, okay? The first factual question we want to know is approximately how many police are there right now? So non-civilian police in Boston. And if you can write down your answer, and then when you're ready, I'll wait a little bit. It looks like when people start writing, okay, and I'll call on the, okay, John Barrows. John says 2,800 all, 1,600 on the street. Anissa Sabi George says 2,500. Andrea Campbell says 2,100. John Santiago says 2,100. Mayor Kim Janey says 10% are out sick. Need to fix that, okay? And then Michelle Wu says 2,000. And so the answer is 2,150. So 2,150 is the number we have. So the second question is, what is the total police and public safety budget? And so that's not just police, it's also emergency response, transportation preparedness. If it helps, there's a line in here, which you guys are all familiar with, for public safety that lays that out. So if you can give us, this is the CAFR for last year, but if you give us just, your best answer you can, and, we'll take that.
We should have been keeping score to see who's the municipal literacy captain at.
Somebody out there is. Somebody out there is. Okay, if everybody, we'll do like 10 more seconds, and give us your best shot, and then we'll take it, okay? Andrea, are you ready? Hi, Andrea Campbell. Okay, so 400 million for BPD. Anissa Sabi George says 500 million. John Barrow says 800 million. John Santiago says 420 million. Is that right, John? Okay. And then Mayor Janey says she's writing words. We need strategic investment in public safety. And then Michelle Wu says 600 million. Okay. So what we have is just about under a billion. It's about 970 million. Okay, that's what it said in the comprehensive annual report, but that's a hard thing to know, okay? But we just want people to have a ballpark. Well, the last one is a yes, no, and it's the issue about the gang database that the BRIC keeps. There is a debate around that. People feel like it's more harmful than productive, and people fall on either side of that debate. We want to know which side you fall on. And so we're asking you a yes, no question about that. Do you support shuttering the gang database? That's what we want to know. Okay, and so we have Michelle Wu is a yes, John Santiago is a no, Kim Janey is a yes, Andrea Campbell is a yes, Anissa Sabi George is a no, and Barros is a needs reform. Okay, and I'm gonna hand it back to Soraya.
Thanks, Ed. Some advocates are calling for $120 million of the police budget to be shifted into community-led safety and wellness programming that's separate from law enforcement. We want to know what your vision is for the police budget. How much smaller or larger do you think the budget should be? And how much of the budget would you, if any, reallocate? And where would you reallocate those funds? Andrea Campbell, you'll go first.
Thank you for the question. I have been a leader when it comes to policing reform, and I often say before it was popular. I didn't need to see George Floyd to know that our police department need a major work to become more transparent, diverse, equitable, and accountable. I am the only candidate with a plan that specifically speaks to a number that I would cut. And in my plan, I have $50 million. It's the highest of any candidate, because I start there because that is what I have been engaging a whole bunch of stakeholders, officers in the department, retired officers, advocates, is realistic and we can absolutely accomplish. I would redirect those resources into mental health and programs of mental health, youth jobs, moving people out of poverty, programs that are, for example, in Boston Housing Authority, other places that need resources. In addition to that, community-based organizations and human capital in the community that is preventing violence every single day and is often under-resourced.
Thank you. John Barros, you'll go next.
It's important that we continue to pursue the police reform and transformation work that we started. When we appointed the Boston Police Reform Task Force, we worked with community leaders and the police to come up with a robust community reform agenda, police reform agenda that would get us the kinds of changes that we need. It includes the Office of Transparency and Accountability for Police to make sure that any policeman, policewoman who is a bad actor doesn't get away with it, and that they are held accountable. We need to institute the civil review board that same committee recommended, and install and make sure that we implement the video cameras that were also recommended, the full program that was recommended. All of the different recommendations need to happen. I don't have a number, but it's important that we push for reform, and then we build a safety alternative to police calls for mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness, and then move any resources.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, you'll go next.
Thank you. We need deep, deep changes to the structure and the culture of the Boston Police Department. I won't pretend for a minute to know what it feels like to be Black in America, Black in Boston. I will share that I have had multiple interactions standing with my mother in the midst of a mental illness episode where police were called and being frozen with fear of what might happen and begging for her to go to the hospital rather than the police station with them. We need to make sure that we are meeting residents with the services they need, keeping everyone safe. And so I support reallocating the funds into investing in our public safety and public health led response. We need to demilitarize the Boston Police. We need to get the overtime line under control. It is unacceptable that we've been in the news for overtime fraud and other incidents of accountability. It goes back to the underlying contract. I put out a plan to get to the embedding accountability in that underlying document.
Thank you. John Santiago, you go next.
Great. Thank you, Soraya. With respect to the budget, as mayor, I'm going to put forth a budget that reflects the needs of the city, and that will be done in conversation with stakeholders, with residents, with advocates, and the BPD. Look, I have no issue with reform. As a part of the Black and Latino caucus at the State House, we pass some of the most comprehensive and progressive reforms across this whole country. We created a police oversight commission. We restricted no-knock warrants. We prohibited chokeholds. We restricted qualified immunity. And so as mayor, I think we need to be reducing our reliance on police officers. We've seen an increase in 911 calls. As an ER doctor, I see what substance use disorder and mental health crises has brought to the city. We don't need armed police going to those types of events. We need a community response that is public health driven. We have models of that all across this country that provide better care and save money. I also want to establish data-driven, evidence-based staffing ratios. I think if we do that, we'll look at our needs and what we can begin to cut from. But that's what I'm committed to doing as the mayor of Boston.
Great, thank you. Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. Definitely need to have reforms. I, as mayor, have already made cuts to the police budget, including cuts to overtime, while making strategic investments, including in our mental health response, including in the creation of the Office for Police Accountability and Transparency, including in racial equity training, including in the Civilian Review Board, and hiring the staff that we need to ensure that across the board, we have the resources needed to tackle some of the tougher issues around reform, whether that be overtime fraud, whether that be looking at policies around sexual assault, whether that be domestic violence policies. And we need to take it beyond implementation of the recommendations that are in the task force. We have to make sure that we're also negotiating those things in the contract.
Great, thank you. Councilor Sabi George, you'll go next.
Boston, we have a tremendous opportunity to implement the reforms that are before us and demonstrate the benefits of accountability and transparency. We all talk about accountability and transparency and how important it is. And to truly lead on community policing, we need to make sure that we are investing in the community and investing in policing. We have to do this in order to have a city that is safe and that our residents, our families, our communities, the people that visit our city and are in our city feel that they have a police department that is responsive to their needs and responsible to them. As mayor, I will continue to push for the critical reforms that are needed, but continue to work to build the relationship between community and police. It is not a question around defunding. We need to invest properly in our police department and invest in decriminalizing what is often so expensive to our city around mental health, homelessness, and substance use disorder crises.
Great, thank you. Our next detailed question. The current police contract with police unions expired a year ago, and it's very likely the next elected mayor will be responsible for negotiating a new contract. What provisions should be included in the new police contract for it to be considered a success? And what are your deal breakers? John Barros, you'll go first.
Thanks, Soraya. So I've been calling for a new public safety agency. Right now, if you call 911, you get either Boston Police, Boston Fire Department, or EMS. We need a fourth public agency that when you call 911, on the other side, there is a trained set of professionals for mental health calls, a trained set of professionals for domestic violence calls, a trained set of professionals for those who can deal with substance abuse, or maybe somebody who's laid out and needs some immediate care, that can then collaborate with police or fire or EMS, just like the other three currently do. We need to make sure that Boston can answer those calls with the properly trained professionals so that we can not put our other professionals in places where they're not trained to deal with. That needs to be negotiated with the police so that the police know that there's a different role. We also need to negotiate the recommendations that came out of the police task force that I talked about earlier. They all need to be in the contract.
Great, thank you. Councilor Wu, you'll go next. What success factors are you looking for, and what deal breakers do you have if you're the one to negotiate the police contract?
Thank you so much. We've been calling attention to this very issue that it's been a year without a contract, and I put forward a detailed plan, so I hope everyone can check that out on our website. The big picture is that we know what we need to do. In fact, activists have been calling out necessary changes for decades. A 2015 audit revealed the same items highlighted. The recent task force lifted them up once again, and yet our underlying contract often shields officers from accountability, gives out overtime for hours not worked, and allows officers to stay on the job and continue in the same types of structures that we have. So I want a couple things. One is to have an objective discipline matrix, removing racial bias from issues of discipline, removing favoritism, and ensuring that there's clear accountability. We need transparency in the negotiations process. We need to ensure that we are exempting the most serious incidents from arbitration so that they are clear and there's accountability. And we need to attack the overtime line item to get that under control. But please check out the full plan.
Thank you. Representative Santiago, you'll go next.
Great, thank you, Soraya. I do think, as mayor, the next BPD contract really provides an opportunity for growth. But it's definitely an opportunity to increase transparency and accountability, because that's what we need most right now in the city. Morale is so low. I see it in our emergency department when I'm working with the BPD every night in some of the most difficult cases as a physician. And so as mayor, I want to build in reform. I want to build in accountability into the BPA contract. Look, right now, it's not a surprise to anyone. We have an overtime issue. Right now, court appearances, constitute, I think, a minimum of 4 hours of overtime pay for as little as just showing up and dropping off a piece of paper. As mayor, I want to ensure that our officers earn the overtime hours that they list. Secondly, we have an issue with respect to police details. I want to make sure that we look at police detail requirements, allowing officers to work a specified percentage of their hours, both regular and overtime, on those detail shifts. I think it's about time that we hold folks accountable. And there's a lot of great Boston police officers that do a tremendous job. But it's those bad actors we need to hold accountable.
Great, thank you. Mayor Janey, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. Basically, we have to reimagine policing and how we respond to crises in our city. Right now, police are called for everything, and we need to make sure that the appropriate people are responding. One example is the mental health pilot that is already included in my FY22 budget. Beyond that, we certainly need to look at how police officers show up at court, how many hours, what is required of them, and whether or not we should continue on that path. Overtime, same thing. Details. A lot of money is spent on details. Many of these details could be done by civilians. That is something we need to look at in the contract. Certainly the policies I mentioned earlier around domestic violence and sexual assault, those things will also have to be negotiated with the union. I also would go further to look at drug policies and what we do around promotional exams and how we elevate folks within the police department, as well as implementing through the contract, the OPAT recommendations. Thank you.
Great. Councilor Asabi George, you have 60 seconds.
The first thing we need to do when thinking about contract negotiations with all of our cities' bargaining units is right-sizing the timetable. We let contract after contract expire and oftentimes don't start renegotiating that contract and bring folks to the table until the next one is about due. The deal breaker for me is that there is diversity at the table during these conversations. When we think about the men and women of the Boston Police Department and the men and women who are members of the Patrolmen's Union in particular, gender diversity, racial diversity, and years of service diversity are really important to me when I think about who's sitting at the table negotiating the next contract. And when I think about that next contract, I want to establish provisions that include paid parental leave. We think about the implications of raising a family and being at work, and how sometimes those two things are very much in conflict. Also expanding conditions for body camera wearing, expanding educational incentives, increasing benefits for mental health and physical health opportunities, and then enforcing uniform standards.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell, you have 60 seconds.
I want to start by saying that I have been fighting and pushing the envelope on these issues for a long time. I helped draft the legislation that created the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency and was able to work with the previous mayor's task force to get it done. But there was one provision in my legislation that did not make it into the mayor's legislation and into the final legislation that was removed, that I tried to fight for, and that was a discipline matrix. And it was pushing for the police commissioner not to be intimately involved in accountability in discipline cases. That was removed. So if I'm willing to fight for it as a counselor, you better believe I would be willing to fight for it if I'm blessed to become the next elected mayor. A whole bunch of things are deal breakers. One, discipline cannot be in the hands of the police commissioner. It just doesn't make any sense. Details, yes, civilians should have a right to look at details and get those jobs. Minimum overtime, no, it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. Removing the limits on body cameras and transparency, requiring information from this department to be automatically released.
Great, thank you. Our next candidate-specific question goes to Councilor Anissa Asabi George. Councilor, there are several positions related to public safety and policing where you have a different position from most of the other candidates. According to the Progressive Mass Boston chapter's questionnaire, you don't support removing school resource officers from schools. You don't support shuttering the gang database. You did not support limiting the use of tear gas and rubber bullets by the Boston Police Department, and you don't support safe consumption sites. You've also received the endorsement of former Boston Police Department Commissioner Willie Gross. Given all of this, how can voters be sure you'll pursue meaningful police reform? And what would that look like to you?
When I think about the role of municipal government and the important work that we have to do here at the city, there are very few responsibilities that we actually have. There's so much work to be done around filling potholes and rebuilding playgrounds and making sure that our schools are fully funded and that our residents have access to high quality and reliable transportation. We also have a very specific responsibility to keep our residents, our visitors to this city, those that do business in this city, those that are going to school in our city. We have a specific responsibility to keep them safe. As a classroom teacher, I spent 13 years teaching at East Boston High, working very closely with our school resource officers who are very much a partner in the work and a part of the school community. They are trained very much to respond to a crisis that is happening in our school. And I was grateful to have their partnership in that work. As it relates to the use of chemical weapons and less lethal force, it is so important.
They're muting you, but I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to answer the question that we're asking. Is there anything
I
that you
appreciate
want
that.
to
Thank
say
you.
to voters about assuring them that you will pursue meaningful reform?
When we think about the less lethal force, we need to make sure that police officers who are charged with keeping the public safe have the tools and the resources they need to do their work, especially as it relates to less lethal force. I have demonstrated over these last 6 years my ability to work in partnership, both with community and police, on these very important issues to keep our neighborhoods, our residents, both free from violence, but also making sure that we have an appropriate response to violence. That partnership, those relationships have created opportunities to do this work together. We do not do this work alone. We cannot do this work alone.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to go to Melissa for our lightning round on racial equity.
Great. Thank you. First question. Boston is a majority minority city. Will you commit to having your cabinet reflect the demographics of the city of Boston? This is a green, red, yes or no question once I see everyone. Okay, John Barrows. We have yes for everyone. I am not seeing a response for John Barrows. And yes, that is a green for everyone. Great. Next question. The city council has begun conversations about reparations. Do you support reparations as a way to help solve the city's racial wealth gap? Again, this is a yes or no question. Amazing. And just like the previous question, everyone said yes. Great. Third question. Do you support the ballot charter change question that aims to increase the city council's budget power and begin bringing participatory budgeting to Boston? Yes or no? I'm just waiting on John Santiago's response. And again, for the third time in a row, everyone answered yes, green.
Sam, I'm converted.
Oh, you said, great, change your mind. All right, I'm turning over to you again, Soraya.
Excellent. I want to switch up the format here because I want to make sure that our candidates have the time and the space to ask the questions that we ask them to prepare for their peers. So if you guys are all ready, we're going to give each person, each candidate a question, 15 seconds to pose a question to a peer of their choice. The responder, just in the same format as tonight, will get 60 seconds. If there's something that the initial questioner wants to clarify, you get another 15 seconds, and we'll allow time and space for that. John Santiago, you get to pose the first question to your peers.
Great. This is a question for my good friend, Mayor Janey. It's a softball one. You've been in the position for a couple of months now. Can you talk about your strategy to advocate and work with the state legislature and how you're going to pass home rule petitions and that sort of thing? As you know, the mayor of Boston has to have a very strong relationship with the legislature, and we'd just love to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I was proud to host the Boston delegation at the Parkman House a couple of months ago. I was proud to testify just today at the State House via Zoom, of course, on important legislation. As you know, I have legislation. Working with the delegation is very important, not just state reps and state senators, certainly working with our federal partners as well as our Boston City Council is very important. So look forward to your continued partnership, Representative Santiago.
It doesn't go unnoticed, Mayor Janey, so thank you for your efforts.
Oh, nice and easy. Mayor Janey, you get to ask the next question to a peer.
Thank you so much. And I will keep it moving with this great conversation with Rep. Santiago. You know, you are an ER doctor and certainly a frontline worker. Very grateful for your service during the pandemic and always. Was wondering, as someone who was on the front lines at the beginning of the pandemic, what do you think that state and city leaders could have done better at the beginning of the pandemic to really stop the spread that was so devastating to so many Boston residents, particularly communities of color?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think when we tackle the pandemic, you know, there are some acute things we could have done better, but you know, why I got into politics, why I got into policy, it's because I'm a big believer in the social determinants of health. You know, we've been failing poor communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, for far too long. And as we saw during the pandemic, if you were poor, if you had less access to economic opportunities, educational opportunities, housing, you were more likely to be sick. You were more likely to come to my emergency room, get intubated, and unfortunately pass. And so I think the charge is from all of us on this conversation is to how do we make sure that every citizen of Boston, particularly those most vulnerable, have every opportunity, whether it's educational, economic, or housing, to be the best that they can possibly be. And you know, those approaching these problems through that comprehensive social determinants of lens, social determinants of health lens, is what I would do.
Great, nice and easy. Councilor Asabi George, you get to ask the next question to your peers.
I really appreciate everyone changing up this form because we've had so many of them that have been very similar. So how much fun this is. My question is for Chief John Barrows. As a small business owner yourself, what are some of the specific either resources or initiatives you think more small business owners or potential owners should know about and consider?
Thanks for the question, Anissa. You know, as a small business owner during the pandemic, as a small business owner of a restaurant during the pandemic, we had it rough. And you know, one of the things we needed to do was figure out how we ask current workers to take on different roles. We had to close the doors and shift our business to delivery. And so there were a couple of folks who used to work in the kitchen who we then had delivering food, right? And there was a whole different, piece of work. We had to figure out how to negotiate that and make that fair. And, the other thing that happened was we needed to have a more robust online presence that we didn't have. One of the programs that we have at the City of Boston that people should take advantage of is free technical assistance to help you negotiate those kinds of things or to help you set up your website, make sure your menu's online and people can order online. Technical assistance is the program that's out there you should take advantage of. Thanks for the question. Anissa, I know you and I, when I've personally stood next to you in different places, you've talked about needles and the importance of, sort of the city.
Hey, wait, it's not your turn, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, Soraya, put some order into this.
It's Andrea Campbell's turn to ask a question.
Sorry, I'm like, don't laugh. I thought it was your turn too, Barrows.
That's okay, Soraya's gonna get it.
I'm gonna direct my question to Acting Mayor Janey, just on mass and CAS, right? This continues to be an issue, of course, that comes up. We were discussing it today on the council side. And I have sent, of course, letters to the previous administration, your administration on these issues. And frankly, despite multiple outreach efforts, have just received no meaningful response. So I would love to hear what is being done, what do you plan to do between now and Election Day to address this crisis that continues to get worse?
So this is obviously a very important issue and one that I know folks know is near and dear to my heart, given that my uncle died with a needle in his arm, and he is no longer here. At that time, this was viewed as a crime, criminal justice issue, and not a public health issue. What is happening every single day in this area where individuals are, so I don't even like referring to it as mass and CAS or methadone mile, because I think it strips people of their humanity. What is happening every single day are life-saving measures. There is a needle exchange underway to help folks who are now seeing an increase in HIV infection. There's life-saving measures every day to reverse overdoses that are happening too often and happening to Black and Brown individuals down there. There is a revamped comfort station that now seeks to engage folks who are seeking help while keeping at bay those who want to do them harm. There's more coordination with the DA's office. There is more coordination with other groups. I'm muted.
John Barrows, it's your turn to pose a question.
Thank you, Mama Soraya. I appreciate that. I thought I was going back and forth with the person who asked you. I was going to ask Anissa a question around needle pickup. I know that's something that you've highlighted, you've talked about. Talk to us about how you would address the issue of the needles that are littered in the Mass and Cass area and the surrounding areas, and then see if you can talk to us about sort of the quantity of needle pickup that you would do and how that would happen.
No, thanks for the question, John, and I appreciate the greater awareness around improper needle disposal and the challenges across our city. So there's two sort of things. One, in-house needle disposal. When we think about individuals who are dealing with substance use disorder at home, those that have a chronic illness like diabetes or receiving infertility treatments, those needles should not be put in household trash. And we worked with the city council and government ops and the previous administration to pass an ordinance that mandates, and that's coming out soon, mandates needle disposal at pharmacies across our city. When we think about what's happening at Mass and Cass, when I took office in 2016 and was chair of homelessness, mental health and recovery, we did a pickup one day and realized that there are 250,000 needles that we were picking up in 2016. That number is up to 750,000 plus today. We need more outreach, more mobile sharps teams, and more people on the street helping with this crisis. Thank you for the question.
Great. And Michelle Wu?
Thanks. I'll kick it over to Andrea so everyone else gets to ask something. The two of us have been at this for some time now. We both got in back in September, so we're on month 9 here. Curious if you can share a little bit about how, there was a very different dynamic then. How has your perspective on the race or how you and your team have been campaigning shifted over time, given this span and the changes in the dynamic?
Yes, we have been there since the beginning. That is right. On Zooms, lots of Zooms. I had to invest in glasses. I've never worn them in my life. But it's been exciting. If anything, I love voter engagement. I think now that there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of COVID, being able to get out and engage with voters in person feels really great. I've learned a great deal as well from constituents we're engaging, that they do believe too that we're in a moment in time in this city where we have a unique opportunity that we probably won't get again, right? To address our painful history of race and racism, and to do the really hard work across every neighborhood as a larger collective to eradicate the persistent inequities that exist in this city. And what I've continued to learn is that even folks who some deem who don't think or care about these inequities do. And they want to play a role in solving for them. And that's been inspirational. So I'm telling the team, keep doing the work, keep doing the engagement, and keep it positive, inspirational, and hopeful.
Well done, everyone. Very civil. We have one more deep dive for everyone, and then we have a specific question for John Barrows. And I will start with Andrea Campbell with this one. When it came to the text exchange between 2 Latina members of the Boston School Committee during the meeting when changes were made to a longstanding entrance exam policy, Only some of the candidates acknowledged the deep generational and current traumas people of Boston have experienced because of racism, and some simply called for their removal. We want to know what and who informs your understanding of this trauma. Also, what, in your view, is the mayor's role, if any, in mediating citywide racial tensions, including overt racism from white communities, as was the case during school desegregation, while acknowledging the history of structural racism and upholding equity? Andrea Campbell, you'll go first.
60 seconds, that can be a whole Zoom. So what informs my response to what we saw with our two Latinas on the school committee is my lived experience. You know, being a Black woman, I have experienced what they described, which is folks treating you differently because of your race, living the inequities that we talk about in the city of Boston, inequities in terms of access to good housing, good schools, you name it. I have experienced those growing up in the city of Boston, and frankly, lost someone as a result. I talk about my twin brother all the time, but let me be clear, it's painful at moments. So I have to take a moment and take a step back and remind myself why I do this work. Someone died who was near and dear to me. And so when I saw what was happening, for them, I appreciated how they spoke up to when we're in these systems fighting the fight to create equity for everyone. It is hard doing that work. It is traumatic at times because we know racism continues to come at you. So I was lifting that up in my response and the complexities of the layers they had to deal with.
John Barros, you'll go next. What informs your understanding of this racial trauma, and what is the mayor's role in mediating citywide racial tensions?
Yeah, no, my personal lived experience is what informs, how I understand their trauma and how I relate to their trauma. And so that's why, and then personally, I know both of them, right? And was able to talk to them. Before I went to Twitter to try to cast judgment or make a statement, I called them. I called them both. I talked to Alex and talked to her about her experience that I knew. And then we talked about the fact, and she was clear that because she had made that statement within that context, that she couldn't play her role anymore, because there were other people on the other side of that who are now hurt, right? And who now have a real question around trust and people's ability to remove emotions out of decision-making. And so it was a tragic situation. It was one that, in a very personal call, she shared very emotional stories. And then the next day I showed up in West Roxbury and found people who were hurt on the other side. As mayor, it would be our—
I think our timer is frozen, but you've reached time. Mayor Janey.
13 seconds, Soraya.
You're going to continue to have 13 seconds. Mayor Janey, you'll go next.
Well, clearly 60 seconds isn't enough to tackle this important issue. This is one that is certainly informed by my own lived experience as a Black woman who has experienced racism, has experienced sexism, has experienced the hate that comes when you are fighting for the right things moving forward. My commitment, just last night, met with Latino leaderships who are also hurt. Leaders in the Latino community are also hurt beyond Alex and Lorna. The truth is they have been doing good, important work on the Boston School Committee, and they are no longer there. And there's an opportunity to make sure that we are filling those seats with people who understand the importance of moving our school department forward and making sure that there are opportunities for all of our kids. In terms of the larger issues around racism in our city, we have more work to do to bring our residents together, to understand what it means to live out our ideals as a country and to ensure that we are creating a better opportunity for all in Boston. I was just trying not to get muted, but I have more to say.
No, good job. Good job. Counselor Asabi George, you're next. What informs your understanding of racial trauma, and what, in your view, is the mayor's role of mediating citywide racial tensions?
Well, there's a lot there to unpack, and 60 seconds is tough to do it, but certainly my own lived experiences as the daughter of immigrants, as the daughter of an Arab Muslim, have certainly informed my upbringing and my perspective on my community that I grew up in this city. But it's so important to always surround ourselves with other people who have had different lived experiences than ourselves. That's certainly around racial diversity, gender identity diversity, age diversity. It is all so important that we have varied voices at the table when we make these decisions. And when I think about our kids, when I think about our students, when I think about our school communities, as a former classroom teacher, the measure of a high quality school starts with kids and families feeling welcome, feeling love, feeling attention and a desire to be in space with each other. And as elected officials, as appointed officials, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Hate and racism will continue to exist in this city.
I need to unmute myself. John Barros, you're the last one left with a candidate-specific question. As the former chief of economic development.
Right, I didn't go for that question yet. Apologies.
Oh, no. Counselor Wu, I skipped you. I'm so sorry. Please.
No worries. Okay, I'll set my own timer too. We're pros at this part. This is such a moving experience to be running in this field of candidates, to be on the campaign trail with all candidates of color, and to know that each of us brings our lived experiences with the microaggressions, with the traumas that we have seen on the campaign trail in our personal and professional lives, and that we all need to strive to create a city, not just where we're arriving at policies to repair harm and advance racial justice and close our gaps, but that the spaces we convene for residents to be part of that conversation make sure that we are knitting the city together. I am sure that Boston has every resource we need to be closing any gap and achieving any policy victory that we set our intentions on. We will be that city in the moment when every single neighborhood feels the same stake in the success and health and stability of other neighborhoods as well. And so our job as mayor will be, whichever one of us will be, to mediate.
It was going to get good. It was going to get good. All right.
Soraya, I didn't go either.
You have 60 seconds.
Right. Well, I think similar to this historic slate of candidates, it's about my personal story, my lived experience as well. Not only what I do personally in my life and my family, my upbringing, but also my time in the ER. I work with some of the most vulnerable residents in all of Boston. And when I heard those comments put forth by the school committee members, I mean, they were hurtful. But it's important to understand they came also from places of hurt. So that I hear them loud and clear, but they also created hurt. So we can do both. And as mayor, I'm committed to holding people accountable, but also fighting for greater equity. And as a person of color, I've been through my own pain. I've had threats thrown against me. I get it. But I strongly believe that we have a lot more in common with each other than we think we do. I don't care if you're from Southie or from West Roxbury, from JP. Fundamentally, we all want the same thing. We all want good schools. We all want public safety. We all want to know if we work hard, good things can happen. And so I have a lot of hope and optimism for the city of Boston, but only if we can get there together. And I'm committed to being the type of mayor who can cross those boundaries, get folks together at the table to really address these complex, persistent problems that we've been having in the city of Boston.
Okay, did everyone go? I got distracted trying to keep a timer for y'all. Did everyone answer? Yes, excellent. Okay, so John Barros, you are the last person that needs a candidate-specific question. As the former chief of economic development and the only candidate coming out of the former administration, how would you assess the administration's performance and your personal contributions to the goals of closing the racial wealth gap?
Thanks for the question, Soraya. I would talk about my track record as a track record that I'm extremely proud of, and I'll list the things that I did. Got into it as soon as I got into office, and actually before, as a candidate for mayor in 2013, I committed to doing a disparity study, something that we needed as a city to set goals. Going into office, we knew that Boston wasn't doing contract with women-owned businesses, wasn't doing business with people of color-owned businesses, and that the numbers were low. But we needed a disparity study so that we can defend it in court. I went in and have been the first person in a very long time to take that seriously and to do a disparity study that we can defend in court. We didn't do it because we didn't know it. We did it because we had to defend it, because in 2003, we lost that battle in court and had to strike down our program. Now Mayor Walsh has signed an executive order with 25% of the spending by the city. About $180 million will go to women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses in the city, and that's a big win. Hope you can give me a little more time.
Time is up. That concludes our deep dives. I'm going to kick it over to Ed so he can tell you all you have a minute for closing statements.
Yeah. So we're at the end almost. We're going to go in reverse alphabetical order. We're going to start with Michelle Wu for a 1-minute closing statement.
Okay, the timer looks dark for me. Okay, thank you, Soraya. So first, thank you so much. You know, you all told us to bring our Sharpie and red and green cards, but you forgot to tell us to bring a towel. This has been an intense forum. It has been fun. I should have expected nothing less from the groups who have been organizing this, because you have been holding us accountable, and elected officials, and rebuilding the political ecosystem with that accountability for so long. I am eager, excited, inspired to partner with you all to make sure we are building this ecosystem of activism and a vision for Boston to be bold, to lead the way in this moment, and to address the long-standing challenges that we know are possible to take care of, that we just need to invest in. We can build the city that we dream of. I am so grateful for our partnership on so many issues and fights along the way. Please get involved. We're running a grassroots campaign, and we'd love to see you helping and partnering along the way. My website is michelleforboston.com. Thanks, everyone.
And Representative Santiago, can I ask you to let Councilor Campbell go next? Okay. Councilor Campbell?
Thank you, and thank you to all of the organizers for pulling us all together. I know it takes work to organize a forum. I appreciate the work that went in, and thank you to everyone who attended and who was a part of this conversation, critically important. I jumped into this race back in September because I knew the urgency of the moment, and I saw that this was our opportunity in the city of Boston to truly do the hard work of addressing our painful history of race, division, redlining, busing, but not to stay there. To really be bold in this moment in time, to eradicate the persistent inequities that exist in this city because of that history. I jumped into this race saying I'm not only a qualified leader, but I've lived the inequities that we often talk about, and will always lead with a sense of urgency in solving for them. I look forward to earning your support in your vote in this race, and of course, the endorsement of the organizations. Please visit my website, andreacampbell.org. A lot of my policy planks are there, and I look forward to staying engaged. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Soraya.
Representative Santiago?
Great. Well, thank you to all the hosts for creating this important forum. It's great to be here. And as I said, in this historic race with this historic slate of candidates, you know, I never really envisioned myself as an elected official until there came a point where in my community, I felt like we needed some changes and we needed some leadership. So a couple of years ago, I decided to challenge a longtime incumbent, knocked on thousands of doors, and won a seat in the legislature. And I'm proud of the work that we've done this past year and the work I've done to represent my district, my neighborhood, and my patients who need it the most. And so whether that was doubling my hours in the emergency room or serving on the COVID leadership team of the State House, you know, we did a lot of work, and we had one of the most productive and progressive legislative cycles in recent memory. We kept our healthcare system afloat. We passed the most comprehensive eviction moratorium. We expanded reproductive rights of women. We did housing reform. We did a whole host of things. And right now, Boston needs that leadership, and there's someone who's dedicated his life to that leadership, whether as a captain in the Army, an ER doctor, as a Peace Corps volunteer. I'm going to bring that each and every day to City Hall. So humbly ask for your support on September 14th.
Thank you. And Mayor Janey.
I want to start by thanking all of the organizers here, and certainly Soraya for doing double duty as an amazing moderator of this discussion, as well as timekeeper as a backup. You know, I am proud to serve as the 55th mayor, as the first woman mayor, as the first Black mayor. I bring to this office a life experience different than any of my predecessors. As someone who grew up in the city, someone who has lived through and overcome so many of the challenges that Boston residents face, I am bringing that lens of equity, of justice, of love to this work. I'm the only person in this race with actual experience being a mayor, leading a city of 680,000 residents, overseeing a budget of $3.75 billion, and leading a workforce of 18,000 employees. I bring my organizing experience, my advocacy, and my love for the city of Boston. I know we can be better, and I want to continue to do this work with all of you to make sure that we get there together. Thank you so much.
Councilor George?
Boston is my home as a first-generation American, as a small business owner, as a former Boston Public Schools teacher, an at-large city councilor, and mother of four. These connections drive me to work harder and deliver more for the city that I love. I believe I am the right leader for this city at this moment. I believe that to build a better Boston, it will take hard work. And as your mayor, I will be present and accessible on the ground in all of the neighborhoods to hear firsthand your stories, your struggles, and your successes, to uplift your voices and let your experiences inform the work and drive the agenda, and bring us together to have tough but necessary conversations, to better understand each other, and to collaborate and find real solutions. It's what I've done as a city councilor, and it's what I will do as your mayor. And it's a lot of work that we have to do, and it will take each and every one of us to create this stronger, more just, more inclusive Boston. And I hope that you will do this alongside me. I'm grateful for tonight and the opportunities to talk with all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, Chief Barros.
Thank you, Ed. I want to thank all of the organizations that brought this together. I want to thank Melissa and Soraya for your facilitation. This is an important conversation, but this conversation for me didn't start yesterday. It didn't start with an announcement of this run. This conversation for me, and the reason why I'm doing what I do, is because this is what I've always done as a young man, as a young Black man in Roxbury, as a teenager, starting at the age of 14, making sure that we can address environmental justice in my neighborhood, a neighborhood that was seeing a crack epidemic, a gang epidemic in the 80s that had been forgotten, disinvested in, redlined. This is the work that I've been doing, and I've been doing it in a very creative, collaborative way. As mayor, I would continue to do this work to center the people of our city, of our neighborhoods, and all that we do to make sure that we fight for equity, to make sure that we fight for racial justice, but that we do it together, not as a divided city, but that is a city that is moving towards a vision where Boston works for everyone. Soraya, couldn't see you there. So I got scared of that mute, and then I had to just jump off real quick.
All right, let's give the candidates a hand. You made it through, okay? We know Election Day is September 14th, but for JP Progressives, the next step in this endorsement process is tomorrow from 6:30 to 7:30. We're gonna have a community conversation talking about this forum and the different candidates, okay? We wanna invite you all to attend that, and there should be a link in the chat letting you know what that is. And just in terms of wrapping up, we want to thank our partners, especially Vanessa Snow, Jonathan Rodriguez, I think Karen Chen, who've been a big part of developing the questions. And we want to keep it short. Everyone's got to go. So we'll see you on the campaign trail, and want everyone to turn out to vote on September 14th. That's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
Night.
you.
See you guys.
Okay.
Good job, guys.
Good job, Soraya.
Good job, all of you guys.
I think moving up, them asking the questions was great.
They're so civil.
I know that was nimble, but that was good. It kept them there, you know? Even though they
There's
asked,
still a lot of people, there's still a lot of not
oh,
sponsored.
everyone's on?
Yeah. Why don't we all leave and come back in? That'll be the fastest way to do this.
Oh, okay.
Y'all have the link? All right.
Let me bring my little note.